So in this lesson, I will cover a very important camera rig system in Maya. So this camera rigging system Maya is actually what I learned from my work as a layout artist. Having a good camera rig in Maya will help you to speed up your process when animating some really complicated camera moves, such as like some dolly cam or crane camera movement. So first thing, let's just create a Maya camera. And let's check display frustum so we can see the FOV. And before we actually rigging the camera, the first very important thing is talking about the rotation order, the concept about rotation order. By default, the Maya rotation order is XYZ, but in the actual daily use, especially for cameras, we will normally use ZXY. So let me give you an example of how rotation order can affect the movement in animating. Let's open up the graph editor and let's key the camera at the first frame at the 000 under rotation order XYZ. And let's just give another key at 120. And under the manipulator object order, we rotate the camera on y-axis and the z-axis. And even though we only rotate the camera on y and z in the manipulator, but if we look at the gimbal, we can see like the camera gimbals actually has been manipulated on both three axes. And as also you can see, also it shows in the graph editor, even though remember we only changed the camera rotation on Y and Z in object mode, but in the graph editor both three axis values has been changed. So in this case, it's really hard for us to understand how much the camera moved in each axis, because the rotation right now we got is a combination of both three axes. So let's switch the rotation order to ZXY, see what kind of difference it makes. Let's do the same thing. We key the first frame and we key at 120 the last frame. And we do the same thing under the rotation manipulator in object mode. We rotate the camera on Y and Z. And as you can see, right now the axis has not been changed at all, and we only see Y and Z axis changed in the graph editor. So that's actually a better and accurate representation of how much we changed in each axis. It's just better for us to know how much we changed the camera through the graph editor, and especially when we animated the camera into the very complicated movements. Sometimes we had to juggle between these three values to get the camera to point at where we want. But if we change to the rotation order to ZXY or the proper rotation order, it's just cleaner in the graph editor. In the sum of the actual live action, the camera will normally move more on the Y rotation, especially basically pan left and right. And sometimes we have tilt up and tilt down. Really rarely we will have the camera roll, and the rotation manipulator is only a sort of visual representation for us to easily move the object, but it's not how actually Maya calculates the rotations for the object. Let me give you another example of what kind of issues will happen if we didn't choose the rotation order properly. Let's do the same thing. Let's do first under the rotation order XYZ. And the first frame we do 000, same thing. And at frame 50, let's just rotate the camera on Y for 90 degrees. And then you can see if we go under the gimbal mode, you can see the the X and Z axis gimbal are overlapping. Now what happens if we try to rotate the camera in Z axis? Let's just rotate the camera on Z axis a little bit to like 30 degrees. In theory, we only change the camera on Y and the Z. In theory, we only change the camera in Y and Z axis, But if we play the animation, you can see because the gimbals are overlapping, so the camera has to squeeze a little bit of room between two gimbals to get into the third position. That's what we call a gimbal lock when we are dealing with the camera animations. Because the rotation manipulator is only a visual representation. It doesn't really represent how the camera moves in Maya 3D system. So let's switch the rotation back to ZXY, and we do the same thing. We rotate on Y for 90 degrees first, and then at frame 80 we rotate the Y axis. As you can see, because right now we chose the right gimbal order, now the camera has no gimbal overlapping issue, and it can just do exactly what we wanted to do, just to rotate on Y and rotate on Z next. So basically, a general rule is to keep the camera rotation order and ZXY, but also depends on case. If you have more camera roll animation than pan and tilt, you can actually put the Z and the first, and then depends on what kind of movement comes the second, and you can choose the right rotation order. So after we establish the concept of the rotation order, right now let's just rig this camera. Actually, by rigging, it's simply just to put this camera under two different groups. So we press Ctrl G twice. Now on top of the camera, we have two groups for us to be able to isolate the movement under each group. So we can just name the top layer as the camera top, and I think I'm gonna call the camera. I'm gonna call the camera root, and the second layer will be camera local. The idea is, for me, I would like to put the sort of rotation on the second layer and the translation on the first layer. And in some case, I actually can use the first layer as the rotation. So the first thing to do is just to choose the rotation order for each layer, but it's better just to put them all at ZXY. Especially on the third layer, the camera itself, it's good to put the camera onto ZXY rotation order, just in case later on we need to add some secondary camera rotation and just to tweak the framing a little bit more, or adding the camera shake. Now let me give you an example, like what's the benefit for rigging the camera like that. Let me just create a sphere for now in the scene, and let's say if I want to do a turntable animation for this sphere, it's basically just make the camera orbit this sphere 360 degrees. So if we don't have any camera rigging system, what we would do is we would either create the circle as the camera movement path and constrain the camera using a path animation use the path animation constraint to put the camera onto that spherical path, or we can just put like a couple of keyframes on the camera itself. But both ways, it's just it's not that intuitive, and even if we use the camera path animation, we will have problems later on. That what if we want to add some secondary animation on top of it? See that right now, even though we can get the 360 degrees, turntable, but the limitation is pretty obvious. Is that what if we want to add another layer? Let's say as the camera orbiting around the sphere, we want to boom up the camera on the Y translation. We don't have the extra layer. We don't have the ability to add the extra layer of movement. So what happens if we use this two layers the camera rig to animate? So if we want to do the same camera orbiting animation, what we need to do is we put the top layer at the origin, the center of the sphere, and on the second layer we just move the camera back on Z-axis to sort of decide how far we want the camera to stay away from the sphere. And then what we need to do is just basically rotate the top layer to give us a nice 360-degree turntable animation. Let me just give you a couple keys. Let me just give it a couple of keys to give it a simple animation. So you see now we get a perfect sphere. We get a perfect circle camera path by just rotating the top layer. And the good thing is, right now, let's say I want to add another layer of animation. Say as the camera orbiting around the sphere, we want the camera to move away from the sphere. So now we can just add another layer of animation on the second translation to make the camera goes further away from the sphere as the camera orbiting. If we want to do a little bit more, it's like we can add another layer of rotation on the camera itself. So as it's orbiting the sphere and moving away, we can actually tilt the camera down to make the sort of reveal the sphere in frame. So let's just look through the camera. You see, as we move away, the camera looks down, the sphere comes from the bottom of the frame. So this is just one of the obvious benefits for using the 3-layer camera system, is that we can just layer on top of the camera movement and not be constrained by not having the extra controllers to animate the camera. And if we want to go a little bit further, we want to actually group the whole scene, including the sphere and the camera, and reposition it to somewhere else in the world. We can actually just group the camera and the sphere and move this whole new group into somewhere else. We can retain all the animation that we already have, we can retain all the animations that we already have, but they just play at a different place in the world. This is pretty useful. When after reanimating the animation and we want to reposition to line up with some other environment assets. So we can just group everything and move them into another place. And here I want to just talk about a little bit more the final extra step that I would add to the camera, is that I love to use a camera shake script to do a little bit a natural handheld camera shake feeling. Here I use a script to create a procedural noise camera shake animation. So now I build a very simple scene. It has a bunch of like a cylinder in there, so we can see the parallax when we're moving the camera. Same thing. Let's just animate the camera very simply from the first frame, and the last frame we just translate the camera on Z. Let's just look through the camera view. Let's look through the camera view for now. As you see, it's a very simple animation. Here I want to mention another very important parameters in camera tab is the film back size, which is the film back size is essentially the sensor size of the camera that I used. It doesn't really matter that much if you are doing a full CG shot, but when you work with the actual plate, you have to make sure that your camera is set to the exact film back that you use to shoot that plate. This is more like for compositing purposes, like we want to make sure that when we are tracking the camera, we use the same feedback. Here's the website called the VFX Camera Database, where you can look up to those camera feedback parameters. We use a lot of Alexa Mini cameras, so here we can just even though we're doing a full CG shot, it's always good to start with the actual film back from the actual camera, and because film back is directly linked to the lens, so when we put an actual camera lens, we want to get a proper framing. So we're now just gonna grab the Alexa Mini film back, which is 8.35 and 0.526. 5:6. And here when setting up the film back, it's always good to pay attention to the film aspect ratio. So if you're doing a 235 wide screen, you have to make sure those numbers in the camera parameters they are at 235 ratio, so you don't have to render extra pixels. Right now it's at 1.7. So this is right now we're using a proper film back in the CG camera. And as we can see, as we move the camera, there's some really nice parallax happening. Right now we need to add some camera shake movement to the camera itself, because all the animation was done on the top 2 layers. Right now we can add an extra layer, the camera node itself. We launch the script and select the camera, and we can add the camera shake script. This will create two different locators to control the camera shake itself. On one layer is the controller, where you can find all the frequency and amplitude parameters. So now if we just if we give the camera shake a little bit of frequency, let's give it about now we can do, actually this script allows you to do both translation and rotation shake. Normally I would just add the shake to the rotation. So let's give the amplitude around 0.5 and give the Y 2 maybe, and give the camera roll rotation amplitude, let's give it 1. And the frequency, maybe I would just set them all to 1, I think. Okay, it's not really obvious. Maybe we need to boost up the value a bit more. Okay, pretty much like that. So you see now we get a really natural, nice handheld we get some really nice natural handheld camera movement using this script. And let's just mute the top layer so you can see this script better. So you see, it's not like just a noise, it's like very natural. You can have some nice movement, nice roll coming out from this script. And if we boost up the frequency to 3, you can get like a more violent camera shake. But remember, keep in mind here, it's not recommended to animate the frequency number. If you want to sort of ramp up the camera shake, you can ramp up the amplitude, but just don't animate the frequency because it would just mess up with the math. I forgot to mention, it's like the camera shake is always, it's always good to add the camera shake at the last step once you figure out all the camera movement, the framing. Don't rely too much on the camera shake to help you to improve your shot framing, because framing, camera movement always comes the first. The camera shake only gives it the extra layer of naturalism. Here is pretty much all I have for the camera rig. Just to recap, just put 2 layers on top of your camera, and the rotation order put to Z, X, Y, and the final step is the camera shake.
学习过程中还有疑问，可以立即加入正版课程的学习交流群，讲师实时在线答疑，与精英学员互相学习。还可以登录一狐网搜索课程 ID 号，获取完整学习课件、工程文件等资料，扫一扫，任何问题小美狐都能帮助你啦。